For generations after the Great Flood, the world was quiet. The waters had withdrawn from the mountains, rivers slowly returned to their ancient paths, and the descendants of Noah began the long task of rebuilding a broken earth. Cities rose again along the fertile valleys of the Euphrates and the Tigris. Fields were planted, stone walls were built, and the memory of the catastrophe slowly faded into legend. But the elders remembered something else. They remembered the stories from before the flood, stories of beings who had once walked among men. Ancient writings spoke of them carefully, almost fearfully. They called them the Watchers. According to the oldest traditions, these beings were not human. They had come from the heavens in an age so distant that even the earliest kings barely understood it. They were described as tall beyond measure, radiant like burning metal, and possessing knowledge that no human civilization should have known. It was said that they taught the first generations of mankind many things: the secrets of metal, the movements of the stars, the hidden mathematics of the heavens. But they also brought something else: forbidden knowledge, knowledge that humanity was never meant to possess. And because of this, the ancient world fell into corruption. Violence spread across the earth. Cities grew powerful but cruel, and giants were said to walk among men. The old texts warned that the flood had not been sent only to cleanse humanity. It had also been sent to erase the influence of the Watchers. And for centuries after the waters receded, no one spoke of seeing them again, until the day a strange event was recorded in a small temple city along the river. The city was not large. It stood on a low hill overlooking fertile farmland. Mud brick walls surrounded its streets, small markets filled the central square, and at the highest point stood a modest temple dedicated to the God of heaven. Inside the temple worked a young scribe. His task was simple. Each day he copied clay tablets, lists of grain, records of trade, and stories preserved by the elders of the city. One evening, as the sun sank behind the western hills, the scribe climbed the temple steps to watch the sky. The air was calm. The fields below glowed in the last light of day. But something in the sky looked wrong. At first he thought it was a star, but it was far too bright, and it was moving, slowly, silently. The light descended from the upper sky like a falling sun, yet it made no sound, no thunder, no wind, only a strange pressure in the air. The scribe felt his heart begin to race. Farmers in the fields stopped their work and stared upward. Children pointed at the sky. The light continued to descend until it hovered above the hills beyond the city. Then something impossible happened. The light began to change shape. It stretched into a tall column, a pillar of pure radiance standing in the darkness. The ground beneath it began to glow faintly. The air vibrated with a deep humming sound, and from within the light, something moved. The scribe later wrote that what he saw next could barely be described in human language. At first, it appeared like a shadow within the brightness. Then, slowly, the shape stepped forward. It was tall, far taller than any man. Its form seemed almost human, but not entirely. Its body shimmered like heated metal. Edges of light flowed across its surface as though it were made of living fire. Its face could not be clearly seen. The brightness around it hid its features, but its presence was overwhelming. Every person who witnessed the event later described the same feeling. Not fear, not pain, but a crushing awareness, as if the boundary between heaven and earth had suddenly grown thin, and something ancient had stepped through. The scribe dropped to his knees, not because he was commanded to,
but because his body could no longer stand. He realized with terrifying clarity what he might be witnessing. The stories of the elders, the warnings written in ancient tablets, the beings who had once descended from the heavens, the ones who had shaped the first age of humanity, the ones who had vanished before the flood. If the old texts were true, then what stood before them now was not a god, not an angel, but one of the ancient watchers. And if they had returned, then something in the world had changed once again, something that the survivors of the flood had never expected. And the young scribe understood one terrible possibility. The watchers had not come to teach humanity again. They had come to see what mankind had become.
For a long moment after the visions ended, the young scribe could not breathe. The images faded slowly from his mind, but the feeling remained. It was as if something ancient had opened a door inside his thoughts. He lifted his head and looked again toward the distant hills. The watcher still stood there, a towering figure of living light against the darkness of the night sky. But now it was no longer moving. It simply stood in silence, watching. The valley below was completely still. Even the wind that had moved across the fields earlier had stopped. The river flowed quietly through the darkness, reflecting the stars above, and the small city rested beneath the temple hill, unaware that something from the oldest age of the world had returned. The scribe slowly rose to his feet. His legs trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what he had just seen. The visions had shown him a world that no longer existed, cities greater than anything humanity had built since the flood, structures so vast they seemed impossible, and beings that walked among those cities who were neither gods nor men. If those visions were true, then the flood had not simply destroyed humanity. It had erased an entire age of the world, an age that few now remembered. Across the valley, the watcher moved again, but this time it did not walk. Instead, it slowly turned its head toward the city, toward the temple, toward the young scribe. The distance between them was enormous, yet the scribe felt something strange, as though the being could see him clearly across the miles of dark land. A pressure filled the air, not a sound, not a voice, but a presence, something vast and ancient brushing against the edges of his thoughts. He realized then that the watcher was not speaking with words. It did not need to. Its presence alone carried meaning. For several long moments the two simply remained there, the lone human standing on the temple rooftop, and the ancient being standing on the distant hills. Then the watcher slowly raised its arm. The movement was calm, deliberate, its massive hand lifted toward the sky above the valley. For a brief moment, the golden light surrounding its body grew brighter. The clouds above the hills shifted gently, and the stars seemed almost to flicker. Then the light began to change. At first, the scribe thought the watcher was moving again, but it was not. The figure itself was beginning to fade. The edges of its form dissolved into small drifting fragments of light. The glowing patterns that moved across its body scattered into the air like sparks carried by the wind. The enormous shape became less solid, less defined, until it seemed almost transparent beneath the stars. Within moments, the towering form was gone. Only faint particles of light drifted across the hillside where it had stood. Then even those disappeared. The valley returned to darkness. Slowly, the wind returned to the fields. The distant animals began to move again, and the quiet sounds of the night filled the land. The young scribe remained frozen on the temple rooftop. He knew that something extraordinary had just happened, something that future generations might never believe. But he also knew something else. If he did not record what he had seen, the memory would disappear, just like the ancient world that had vanished beneath the flood. So, before the night ended, he returned to the temple archives. The room was quiet. Rows of clay tablets rested on wooden shelves along the walls, records of harvests, trade agreements, stories passed down from the elders. But none of them told of what had happened that night. The scribe took a fresh piece of clay and placed it on the stone table. By the light of a small oil lamp, he began to write, slowly, carefully, every detail he could remember. The strange star in the sky, the descending light, the pillar that touched the earth beyond the hills, and the towering being that stepped out of it. He wrote about the visions, the ancient cities, the giants that once walked among them, and the flood that had erased that forgotten world. When he finished the tablet, the oil lamp beside him had almost burned out. For a long moment he looked at the lines carved into the clay. Then he added one final message, a warning meant for people who might read the tablet long after he was gone. He wrote, "The beings who came before the flood may not have vanished. They may only be watching, waiting to see what humanity becomes." When the tablet was finished, he placed it carefully on the shelves of the archive, among hundreds of other records. There it would remain, hidden among the memories of an ancient city. Years passed, then centuries. The city slowly changed. Walls collapsed, buildings turned to dust. The temple itself eventually fell into ruin. But somewhere beneath the earth, the clay tablet survived, buried beneath layers of sand and stone, its message waiting in silence. Today, we find fragments of stories like this in many ancient traditions, in mysterious tablets, in forgotten scrolls, in writings discovered in caves and ruins across the world. Stories about beings who once descended from the heavens, stories about knowledge that changed the early world, and warnings that the boundary between heaven and earth is thinner than we believe. Perhaps the flood ended the first age of humanity, but it may not have ended the story of the Watchers, because if the young scribe recorded the truth that night, then somewhere beyond the understanding of our world, they may still be watching, waiting for the moment when history begins again.